Imagine it's the late 1950s. You're expecting a baby, but you're plagued by insomnia and morning sickness. Your doctor, with a reassuring smile, hands you a new miracle drug, completely safe, he says. You take it with immense gratitude. Little do you know that small pill has just triggered one of the most horrific medical disasters in history. We'll explore how a seemingly innocuous sleep aid became a weapon that crippled thousands of children, and the story of its creation will shock you. This was an era of boundless faith in scientific progress. The post-war world yearned for simple solutions to complex problems, and chemistry and medicine seemed like new gods. Sedatives and sleeping pills were all the rage, but older drugs, barbiturates, were lethally dangerous. Taking them was akin to playing Russian roulette. In the 1950s, Britain, for instance, barbiturates were responsible for 1 in 10 fatal poisonings. Every pill was a risk. So the craving for a safe sleeping pill wasn't just a desire, it was a cry for help. And help came from Germany. The company Chemie Grünenthal created a substance called Thalidomide. Its main advantage was incredible. It was virtually impossible to commit suicide with it. Grünenthal's scientists couldn't find a lethal dose for mice. They fed them colossal amounts of the drug, and the animals simply fell asleep and woke up later. This was unheard of. In a world of dangerous barbiturates, the new drug seemed literally bulletproof. It was a revolution in safety. The drug hit the market under the brand name Contergan. Advertisements and brochures screamed, "As safe as a glass of milk, ideal for pregnant and lactating mothers." The company deliberately marketed it to this most vulnerable audience. This wasn't an accident. It was a cold strategy. Chemie Grünenthal sent over 40,000 letters with free samples to doctors across Germany. They positioned Contergan not just as a sleeping pill, but as a panacea for stress, anxiety, and morning sickness. They created demand from above through trusted intermediaries, doctors. Picture a world map with lights flashing. The UK, Australia, Canada. 46 countries in total. Thalidomide became a global bestseller. In West Germany, its sales at one point surpassed those of aspirin. This wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. The pharmaceutical giant celebrated its triumph. But beneath the surface of this triumph, in maternity wards around the world, the first, barely perceptible cracks were already beginning to appear. And these cracks looked horrific. In maternity wards in Germany, and then around the world, babies began to be born with an extremely rare birth defect called Phocomelia. Their limbs were either missing or shortened beyond recognition, with hands and feet attaching directly to the torso. People cruelly nicknamed them seal children. Doctors were in a panic. Phocomelia was so rare before the 1950s that most medical professionals never saw a single case in their entire careers. Now, a sudden epidemic had begun. It was as if children with wings had suddenly started to be born in one city. It defied all known laws of biology. Initial hypotheses were shots in the dark. Doctors blamed everything: nuclear tests on Pacific atolls, X-rays, new viruses, even food preservatives. But no theory held up. There was no connection, no pattern. It was like trying to find a black cat in a dark room without knowing if it was even there. The doctors' despair grew daily, because admitting their complete ignorance was even more terrifying than even the wildest hypothesis. Put yourself in the shoes of a doctor in 1960. You have several such cases on your hands, seemingly unrelated. What would you do? Would you suspect the most popular, most advertised, safest drug on the market? This question confronts us with a horrifying fact. Sometimes evil hides behind a mask of absolute safety. The first real alarm bell didn't ring in maternity wards, but in neurologists' offices. Adult patients who had been taking thalidomide for a long time began complaining of numbness and tingling in their hands and feet. The diagnosis was grim: peripheral neuritis, irreversible nerve damage. Chemie Grünenthal knew about this. By the end of 1960, they had received over 1,300 reports of such cases, but their official response was chilling: no connection proven. It was a wall of bureaucratic denial. Official medicine reached a dead end. The corporation denied any problems. But behind their backs, in the quiet of hospital rooms and the kitchens of ordinary homes, mothers and nurses began to speak. They compared their stories, their prescriptions, their tragedies, and their quiet whispers would soon turn into a storm that would sweep everything in its path. This storm was raised by two men working on opposite sides of the world. The first was German pediatrician Widukind Lenz. He did what no one else had done. He simply looked at the calendar. The surge in births of children with deformities perfectly coincided with the market launch of the sleeping pill Contergan. He began his quiet investigation, interviewing dozens of mothers, assembling their stories into a single, horrifying picture. Meanwhile, in Australia, obstetrician William McBride, unaware of Lenz, saw the same nightmare unfolding in his maternity ward. He was the first to dare to speak out publicly. He wrote a letter to the world's leading medical journal, The Lancet. It was published on December 16, 1961, and consisted of just 5 sentences. It wasn't a loud manifesto, but a short, yet devastatingly accurate observation that became one of the first nails in Thalidomide's coffin. Their detective work was meticulous. They painstakingly gathered data and came to a shocking conclusion. It wasn't about the dosage. Even one pill taken during a critical period of pregnancy between the 20th and 36th day could cause disaster. Thalidomide was a teratogen, meaning a substance causing birth defects of incredible potency. Its mechanism was diabolically simple. It blocked the growth of new blood vessels. For an adult, this isn't critical, but for an embryo whose limbs are forming during this period, it was a death sentence. The drug literally turned off the blood supply to growing arms and legs, halting their development. Let's look at this through a mother's eyes for a second. The doctor asks you hundreds of questions: what you ate, where you were, what illnesses you had, and then he asks, did you take this sleeping pill for nausea? At that moment, your world collapses. The small, harmless pill that your doctor recommended with a smile turns out to be the monster that crippled your child. This isn't just a medical discovery. It's a personal tragedy multiplied by thousands. Lenz spoke at a conference, directly accusing Grünenthal. McBride published his data. The medical community was in shock. The company denied everything, but the evidence was too compelling. On November 16, 1961, Lenz called the company's headquarters and delivered an ultimatum. On November 26, 1961, Grünenthal withdrew the drug from sale in Germany. Other countries began to follow suit. A panicked global recall of the drug began. The drug was recalled. But for more than 10,000 families, it was already too late. And the worst part, in one country, the disaster could still be stopped. But Chemie Grünenthal was not going to give up. The withdrawal of the drug from the market was not the end of the story for them, but the beginning of a new battle. They went on a full-scale offensive. This was not a defense, but a coordinated attack on anyone who dared to speak the truth. Doctors, like Widukind Lenz, were threatened with multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuits, an attempt to silence them. Enormous pressure was exerted on newspaper editorial offices. Simultaneously, an expensive PR campaign was launched with a simple and arrogant message. Our drug is so good that competitors are trying to destroy us with dirty tactics. They tried to turn their guilt into a story of unjust persecution. It was a war against the truth, and they waged it without rules. This war was built on a foundation of lies they laid from the very beginning, because the truth, buried in their own archives, was damning. They had internal reports that thalidomide caused irreversible nerve damage in adults. They knew, but they simply did not collect data on its effect on the fetus, cynically hiding behind the fact that the law did not explicitly require it. And the few pregnancy tests they did conduct were a scientific farce. They were performed on rats, and only on rats. The metabolism of these rodents is such that their fetuses are virtually immune to thalidomide. This was not just an insufficient test, it was a deliberately useless test, chosen to get the desired result. When independent scientists later tested the drug on rabbits and primates, whose metabolism is closer to human, They immediately got the nightmare that was unfolding in maternity wards around the world. On a corporate evil scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is a tragic mistake and 10 is conscious infliction of harm for profit, Grünenthal's actions are somewhere around 11. They didn't just make a mistake. They knew about the problems. They concealed them. And they continued to aggressively market their drug to the most vulnerable audience, pregnant women. This was not negligence. It was a cold, cynical calculation. Their next line of defense was the courts. The company unleashed an army of Germany's best lawyers with a single objective: to drag out the proceedings for decades. The tactic was simple and cruel: bury the plaintiffs under an avalanche of paperwork, exhaust the victims' families financially and morally, and force them to give up the fight in exchange for paltry handouts. This was a second wave of suffering, this time legal. The main trial in Germany began in 1968. It became the longest in the country's history at that time. But in 1970, it ended with nothing. The court dismissed the case without a verdict of guilt. The company merely agreed to pay 100 million marks into a compensation fund. No one from the leadership went to jail. Justice was sold. Half a century passed. It was not until 2012 that the company finally issued an official apology. The CEO spoke of deep regret and apologized for not finding a way to reach out to the victims for 50 years. They weren't apologizing for the crippled children. They were apologizing for their long silence. For thousands of survivors, it sounded like the ultimate, most sophisticated insult. The company tried to buy forgiveness with money and empty words. But while this cynical legal war raged in Europe, across the Atlantic, in the U.S., one woman single-handedly held the line against this monster, and she won. Her name was Frances Kelsey. In 1960, she had just started working at the FDA, the American Food and Drug Administration. One of her first assignments was to review the application for thalidomide approval in the U.S. routine paperwork. But Kelsey wasn't just a doctor. She was a pharmacologist who had written her dissertation on how chemicals pass through the placenta to the fetus. This was not a coincidence. It was the meeting of the perfect predator with the only expert in the world who was perfectly prepared to recognize precisely this threat. The American company Richardson Merrill, which had bought the license for the drug, exerted immense pressure on the FDA. They wanted immediate approval to start earning millions. For them, it was a mere formality. After all, the drug was already a global bestseller, its safety proven in dozens of countries. But Kelsey, after reviewing the application, found it shockingly weak. She was alarmed by reports of nerve damage in adults. But most importantly, she saw a gaping hole where data on safety for pregnant women should have been. It simply wasn't there. And she said, no. Under the laws of the time, if the FDA did not reject an application within 60 days, it was automatically approved. Kelsey used every bureaucratic loophole to repeatedly reset that 60-day timer, demanding more and more evidence. She rejected the application not once, but 6 times. The company was furious. Its representatives called Kelsey's superiors, wrote complaints calling her a stubborn bureaucrat and a fussy stickler. She was accused of standing in the way of progress and depriving Americans of a miracle drug. Frances Kelsey became a living bureaucratic firewall. On one side, she faced pressure from a multi-million-dollar business. On the other, her own superiors, who wished to avoid conflict. She single-handedly held back this onslaught, using only scientific thoroughness and regulatory paragraphs as her weapons. And then the thunder struck. News from Europe about children with Phocomelia reached the U.S. Overnight, Frances Kelsey's stubbornness transformed into national heroism. She single-handedly saved America from an epidemic that would have crippled tens of thousands of children. President John F. Kennedy personally awarded her the nation's highest civilian honor, the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service. Presenting it, Kennedy said, "Her exceptional judgment prevented a very serious tragedy." But behind this story of heroism lay 10,000 crippled lives. For them, the tragedy didn't end in 1962. It was just beginning. They are called thalidomiders. And their stories are not tales of victims. They are an epic of human resilience. They learn to write with their feet with calligraphic precision. They drive cars built around their bodies. They raise families, run companies, become artists and activists. They rebuilt the world for themselves because they had no other choice. And here, the story takes its most shocking turn. Thalidomide did not disappear. It returned. In the 1990s, doctors discovered it worked wonders in treating leprosy and certain forms of blood cancer, such as multiple myeloma. The killer drug became a savior drug. This isn't magic, it's brutal biochemistry. The very property that crippled children, the blockage of new blood vessel growth, turned out to be the key to salvation. A cancerous tumor, to grow, desperately needs new vessels for nourishment. Thalidomide simply cuts off its oxygen, depriving it of blood supply and suffocating it. Monster and savior turned out to be two sides of the same coin. Look at your hands. For a second, imagine you can't use them. You can't button a shirt, pick up a cup of coffee, hug a loved one. The thalidomide tragedy isn't an abstract story from the past. It's a daily, hourly reminder for thousands of people of the fragility of our bodies, and of the incredible strength of the human spirit, which finds ways to live, even when the body betrays it. This disaster forever changed the rules of the game in medicine. From its ashes, the entire modern system of clinical trials was born. In the U.S., for example, the scandal led to the passage of the 1962 Kefauver-Harris Amendment. For the first time in history, it required pharmaceutical companies to prove not only the safety, but also the efficacy of their drugs. We are all protected today by a law written with the blood of thalidomide victims. But there are wounds that no law can heal. These are psychological scars. Imagine a mother who lives her entire life with the knowledge that a nausea pill, taken on a doctor's advice, crippled her child. This sense of guilt haunted them until their dying day. There was social stigmatization, broken marriages, shattered lives. This is a tragedy that has no and can have no statute of limitations. Its echo still resounds today. This story leaves behind not only scars but also three vitally important rules. First, skepticism is your main defense. Never trust drug advertisements 100%. Always ask your doctor questions about side effects, especially when it comes to new drugs. Your health is your responsibility. Second, one person's voice matters. The stories of Lenz, McBride, and Kelsey prove that one principled professional can save thousands of lives. Don't be afraid to question and go against the system if you are confident in your convictions. And third, the past never dies. Philosopher George Santayana said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Thalidomide is not just a story. It is a vaccination for humanity against overconfidence and greed. Yes, the system has improved. But let's remember the recent opioid crisis in the U.S., scandals with other drugs. There is no absolute guarantee of safety even today. Vigilance is the price we pay for our health and the health of our children. So what was the main cause of this tragedy? The malicious intent of a specific corporation that knew the risks, or the criminal negligence of the entire medical system of that time, which blindly believed in a miracle pill? Write just one word in the comments: intent or negligence. Let's see what you think was more prevalent. But when words run out, only one image remains: hands. The hands of a person born without them in the conventional sense. Fingers, growing almost from the shoulders, flying across a keyboard with incredible precision, or holding a brush, drawing a fine line on a canvas. This is not an image of tragedy. It is an image of victory, a quiet, stubborn anthem to the human spirit that refuses to be broken.